The planet Zrith was a marvel of order and sophistication, a testament to the brilliance of its inhabitants. Towering, crystalline cities glowed softly under the twin suns, their spires reaching toward the sky like silent prayers to intellect and progress. The Zrithans had achieved near perfection in every aspect of their society. Their technology was flawless, their culture rich and ancient, and their sense of superiority firmly entrenched. For the Zrithans, there was no doubt that they were the pinnacle of life in the galaxy, an assumption reinforced by their long history of technological advancements and their dominion over multiple star systems. To them, other species less intelligent, less evolved were to be tolerated but never truly respected. Chief among these were humans. Zrithan scholars taught that humans were emotional, irrational creatures who relied more on their primitive instincts than reason. In Zrithan lore, humans had long been labeled as filthy animals, a reputation dating back to the first encounter with the species centuries ago. When the Zrithans had first encountered early human explorers, they had found the human spacecraft laughably crude. Their knowledge of the cosmos was embarrassingly limited, and their inability to control their emotions was seen as a fatal flaw. The Zrithans had written them off as irrelevant in the grand scheme of galactic civilization. Since then, no human had ever set foot on Zrith, and few were ever allowed near Zrithan colonies. Humans had become a symbol of everything the Zrithans despised: disorder, emotion, and chaos. Dr. Zira Talon was no exception. She was a highly respected scientist, a product of the most advanced institutions on Zrith. With her twin pair of shimmering blue eyes, the mark of a true intellectual in Zrithan society, and her bioluminescent skin glowing in soft shades of green and blue, she represented everything that was Zrithan excellence. She had spent her life studying the mind, honing her craft, and pushing the boundaries of what the Zrithans knew about consciousness and intelligence. And yet, despite her vast knowledge, even Zira held deeply ingrained prejudices about humans. That was why she was horrified when the alarm blared across the city. An unauthorized spacecraft had entered Zrithan airspace. Dr. Zira was in the middle of a delicate experiment when the sirens echoed through the lab, and a series of messages flashed across her holoscreens. Unknown vessel detected. Human origins. Prepare for immediate containment. Humans? Zira muttered in disbelief. It had been centuries since any human craft had ventured this deep into Zrithan space, let alone landed on their planet. The thought of a human being on Zrith filled her with disgust. What kind of crude, filthy beast had dared to defile the capital of the Empire? Within minutes, the intruder was captured. The ship, a battered and barely functioning human vessel, had crash-landed in the southern district. The Zrithan authorities moved swiftly, sealing off the area and transporting the sole occupant to a secure research facility. It wasn't long before the details reached Zira's desk. The human was male, mid-30s by Earth standards, and appeared to be the captain of the ship. For some reason, Zira was assigned the task of studying him. The facility was cold and sterile, a far cry from the beauty of the Zrithan capital just outside its walls. Zira stood in front of the observation window, peering into the containment chamber where the human was being held. Her first impression was exactly what she had expected. He was disheveled, his clothes torn, his face marked with scratches and bruises. He looked weak, injured, and entirely beneath her. This was the creature she was supposed to study? This animal? The human, whose name was listed as Darius Cole, sat on a metal slab, his back against the wall. His breathing was shallow, his movements slow. Zira watched him for a moment, her eyes narrowing. He seemed to be conscious, though barely. A team of Zrithan medics had already examined him and determined that his injuries were serious but not life-threatening. They had healed the worst of the wounds with their advanced technology, leaving him stable but still vulnerable. "Why do we bother?" Zira muttered under her breath. "Why not send him back to his planet?" "Because the Council wants to know why he's here," a voice responded from behind her. It was Jean Tier, one of the senior scientists overseeing the containment protocols. He was tall, even by Zrithan standards, with skin that shimmered in a gradient of purple and silver. His demeanor was cold, as was typical of Zrithan intellectuals. Zira turned to face him, her expression one of mild annoyance. Surely, there's nothing to learn from this. This human. Look at him. He's an emotional wreck. A survivor of a failed mission, no doubt. What could he possibly offer us? Perhaps nothing, Gentil replied, his voice smooth and detached. Or perhaps something. We do not yet know. But it's your job to find out. Zira sighed, turning back to the human in the chamber. She had read about humans' emotional instability, their tendency to act impulsively, and their lack of control over their base instincts. Watching Darius now, she could see all of those traits at play. He was clearly distressed, his body tense, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Typical. But then something caught her attention. Despite his apparent distress, Darius wasn't panicking. His breathing, while labored, was controlled. His eyes, though scanning the room, weren't wild with fear. Instead, they seemed to be calculating, assessing the situation. For a brief moment, Zira's curiosity was piqued. He's not like the others we've studied, she said quietly, more to herself than to Gentil. Of course not, Gentil replied dismissively. He's a captain. He's likely been trained to withstand pressure and stress. That's why he hasn't broken down completely. But don't let that fool you. In the end, he's still human. Zira nodded, though a small part of her disagreed. There was something different about this one. She had read the reports from previous encounters with humans, and none of them had behaved like this. Most had been overcome by fear or anger, lashing out violently or collapsing into hysteria. But Darius was calm, composed, almost defiant, in a way. She watched as he shifted slightly on the slab, wincing from the pain in his side. His hands clenched into fists for a moment before relaxing. He wasn't giving up, not yet. What will you do? Gentil asked, his tone suggesting he cared little for the answer. Zira straightened, her mind made up. I'll study him, as ordered. But I'll do more than that. I want to understand why he's different. There's something here that we haven't seen before. Gentil raised an eyebrow but said nothing, turning to leave the room. As he exited, Zira remained by the observation window, her eyes fixed on the man in the chamber. For the first time in her life, she found herself wondering, was it possible that the Zrithans had misjudged humanity? Could there be more to this species than their crude, animalistic nature suggested? Could this one man be proof that the galaxy's greatest intellects had been wrong all along? She couldn't be sure. But she intended to find out. The Grand Hall of Wisdom was one of Zritha's most sacred spaces, an ancient building that predated even the founding of the Empire itself. Its walls, made from the glowing obsidian native to the planet, shimmered with the energy of past thinkers who had passed through its halls. Massive crystalline structures floated in the air, held aloft by advanced gravitational technology, casting shimmering patterns of light across the chamber. It was here that the Zrithans conducted their most rigorous intellectual trials, the same trials that had shaped the Empire into a society of unparalleled intelligence and precision. And it was here that Darius Cole, a mere human, would face a challenge unlike any he had ever imagined. Dr. Zira Talon stood at the edge of the observation platform, her twin pairs of eyes fixed on Darius. She had fought hard for this. Despite initial resistance from the council, she had managed to convince them that Darius should be tested, that there was something about him that merited deeper investigation. She had argued that if this human could pass the trials, it would challenge the Zrithan assumption of human inferiority, and perhaps lead to a re-evaluation of their role in the galaxy. The council had reluctantly agreed, though they had done so with a sense of smug superiority. After all, no non-Zrithan had ever passed the trials of wisdom. Even some Zrithans failed to complete them, their minds broken under the weight of the complex puzzles and moral challenges presented in the arena. The council was certain that this human would fail spectacularly, confirming once and for all the Zrithan view that humans were nothing more than primitive animals. Zero wasn't so sure. Darius stood in the center of the arena, looking up at the vast, floating structures around him. His face was calm, his posture relaxed, but Zero could sense the tension in him. He had been briefed on what was about to happen, though no human could truly prepare for the magnitude of the Zrithan trials. Still, there was something in his eyes, something Zira had noticed since the moment she had begun studying him. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't overcome by fear, and he wasn't overwhelmed by the alien environment around him. Instead, he seemed to thrive under pressure. A voice boomed through the hall, reverberating off the crystalline walls. Let the trials begin. The first trial was a test of abstract reasoning and pattern recognition. A series of holographic symbols appeared in the air around Darius, each one rotating and shifting into various configurations. The symbols were ancient Zrithan scripts, layered with complex geometric shapes and embedded with patterns that required deep spatial reasoning to decode. Zrithans, with their advanced cognitive abilities, found this challenge stimulating but manageable. For a human, it was expected to be nearly impossible. Zero watched closely as Darius stared at the shifting symbols. She could see the subtle changes in his posture, the way his eyes tracked the movements, the way his hand flexed at his side, as if he was physically working through the problem. There was no panic, no wild guessing. He was studying the symbols, analyzing the patterns. Minutes passed, and the audience, composed mostly of Zrithan officials and scholars, began to murmur among themselves. They were expecting Darius to fail immediately, to crumble under the pressure of the alien test. But he didn't. Instead, he slowly raised his hand and touched one of the symbols. It rotated, locking into place. He touched another, then another, each time triggering a shift in the pattern. Finally, the symbols aligned into a coherent structure, and a soft chime echoed through the hall. Darius had solved the puzzle. Zira felt a surge of satisfaction, though she kept her expression neutral. Around her, the Zrithans were less composed. Several of them exchanged surprised glances, their bioluminescent skin dimming in confusion. This wasn't supposed to happen. A human wasn't supposed to succeed. The next trial began almost immediately. This one was a test of logical reasoning and emotional intelligence, designed to expose a participant's ability to navigate complex social situations while under duress. Darius found himself standing in front of a holographic projection of 3 Zrithan figures, each representing a different societal role: a leader, a worker, and a child. The simulation posed a moral dilemma. A catastrophic event was about to occur, and Darius had to decide who would be saved, knowing that the consequences of his decision would have lasting impacts on Zrithan society. Zira knew this test was designed to exploit a human's perceived weaknesses, their emotional impulsivity, their inability to think beyond the immediate consequences of their actions. It was a test that many Zrithans struggled with, as it required balancing empathy with cold, calculated reasoning. Darius stood still for a moment, looking at each holographic figure in turn. Zira could see the gears turning in his mind. He was weighing the moral implications of his decision, but he wasn't letting his emotions overwhelm him. There was no hesitation in his movements as he reached out and made his choice. He saved the child. Zrithan society valued the future above all else, and by choosing to save the youngest, Darius had aligned himself with one of the core tenets of their culture. But it wasn't just about the choice itself, it was the way he made it. He hadn't rushed. He hadn't let sentimentality cloud his judgment. He had acted with both empathy and strategic foresight. Another chime signaled the end of the trial. Another success. By now, the Zrithan council members were visibly unsettled. Zira could sense the unease rippling through the audience. They had expected Darius to fail spectacularly, to confirm their biases about human inferiority. But instead, he was passing each trial with an unexpected level of competence. They couldn't dismiss it any longer. This human was different. The final trial was the most difficult. It was a test of creativity, a trait the Zrithans valued almost as much as intelligence. In the center of the arena, a series of building blocks, each representing different elements of technology, biology, and philosophy, appeared in front of Darius. His task was simple in theory: use the blocks to create a solution to an undefined problem. It was a test designed to measure innovation, the ability to think beyond established norms. Zira watched, her heart pounding in her chest, as Darius approached the blocks. This would be the true test, she knew. Humans were often seen as creative, but their creativity was frequently dismissed by Zrithans as chaotic and undisciplined. Would Darius be able to solve the puzzle in a way that impressed the council? Darius studied the blocks for several minutes, his brow furrowing in concentration. Then, slowly, he began to piece them together. At first, his construction seemed haphazard, a disorganized assembly of components that didn't follow the rigid, methodical patterns that Zrithans were accustomed to. The audience watched in confusion, their whispers growing louder as they tried to make sense of what he was doing. But Zira saw it before the others did. Darius wasn't following a linear path, he was creating something entirely new. His solution wasn't based on traditional Zrithan logic, but it was brilliant in its own way. By the time he was finished, he had constructed a model of a functioning ecosystem, complete with interconnected systems of energy, life, and sustainability. It was a solution that demonstrated not only creativity but a deep understanding of balance and harmony, traits the Zrithans had long considered uniquely their own. When the final chime sounded, there was a stunned silence. Darius had passed the trial. The council members, their skin dimming in shock, exchanged uncertain glances. For the first time in their long history, they were forced to confront the possibility that they had been wrong about humans. Dr. Zira Talon felt a surge of vindication, but also something else, a deep sense of awe. Darius Cole had done more than just survive the trials, he had thrived in them, proving that humanity was capable of much more than the Zrithans had ever imagined. As Darius stood in the center of the arena, his face calm but his eyes filled with determination, Zira knew that this was only the beginning. The Zrithan Empire would never be the same. Zrith had never been this silent. The crystalline spires of the capital city stood tall and magnificent, casting their usual ethereal glow under the twin suns. But something had changed. The air itself felt heavy, as though the planet held its breath, waiting for an inevitable catastrophe. The news had spread faster than light itself. An ancient enemy, thought to have been destroyed centuries ago, had returned from the darkest corners of the galaxy. The Siltar. Dr. Zira Talon stood in the council chamber, her mind still reeling from the revelation. The Siltar were more than just a threat, they were a nightmare from the Zrithan past. A race of monstrous conquerors, they had once ravaged entire star systems, leaving nothing but desolation in their wake. Their technology was fearsome, but it was their cruelty that had etched them into the darkest chapters of galactic history. Centuries ago, the Zrithans had believed them to be extinct after a cataclysmic war had supposedly wiped them out. Now, they were back, and Zrith was their first target. The council chamber, usually a place of calm deliberation, was filled with a tense energy. High Counselor Vekran stood at the center of the room, his silver and gold bioluminescent skin glowing dimly, a sign of his deep agitation. His voice, though measured, carried a clear undercurrent of fear. The Siltar fleet is already in the outer system, Vekran announced, his voice echoing across the chamber. They have bypassed our outer defenses with ease, rendering our strongest orbital platforms obsolete. We have mere days, maybe hours, before they reach Zrith itself. Murmurs spread through the council, their glowing skin flickering in shades of blue and purple, signaling confusion and distress. These were not mere politicians, they were the most brilliant minds in the Empire. Yet, for all their intelligence, they were utterly unprepared for the return of an enemy as powerful and brutal as the Siltar. Dr. Zira stood at the back of the chamber, observing the debate unfold. Her mind wasn't on the council, though. It was on Darius Cole. He had completed the trials of wisdom just days ago, challenging everything the Zrithans believed about humans. And now, as their society faced annihilation, he was more than just an intellectual curiosity. He was a potential asset. Zrithan military strategy had always been one of calculated precision, of overwhelming an opponent with superior technology and advanced tactics. But the Siltar didn't fight by the rules of war that the Zrithans were used to. They were brutal, unpredictable, and relentless. For the first time in centuries, the Zrithans were faced with an enemy they didn't fully understand, an enemy they feared. Zira's thoughts were interrupted by the booming voice of Vecran, who had turned his attention to her. His eyes narrowed, his tone accusatory. "Dr. Talon," he said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "You brought this human here, and you've vouched for him. Tell us, can he offer us anything of value in this war? Or was your entire experiment a waste of time?" All eyes turned to her. The weight of the council's gaze was heavy, but Zira didn't flinch. She had been prepared for this moment, knowing that Darius would soon be called into the fold. She straightened and spoke clearly. "Captain Cole has proven himself beyond our expectations. His adaptability, his creativity, these traits are exactly what we need now. The Siltar are not an enemy that can be fought with our traditional strategies. We need new ideas, new perspectives." Vecran's expression was skeptical. "You're suggesting we trust a human one who barely understands our technology, let alone our tactics to help defend our civilization from the Siltar?" "I'm suggesting," Zira replied, her voice firm, "that Darius Cole has faced enemies unlike any we have ever encountered. His species has survived through sheer ingenuity, often against impossible odds. That is precisely what we need now. He can think in ways we cannot." There was a murmur of dissent among the council members, but Vecran silenced them with a gesture. He stared hard at Zira for a long moment before finally speaking. "Very well," he said, his tone cold. "If you believe this human can be of use, then let him prove it. But make no mistake, if he fails, it will be on your head, Dr. Talon." Zira nodded, but her mind was already on the next step. She left the council chamber without another word, making her way toward the secure quarters where Darius had been staying since completing the trials. When she arrived, Darius was sitting at a table, looking out through a transparent panel at the distant horizon. He had changed since the trials. His face was harder now, his eyes more focused, as if the weight of the situation had fully settled upon him. Zira didn't waste time. "We're under attack." Darius turned to face her, his expression calm but serious. "I heard. The Siltar, right?" She nodded. "They've broken through our outer defenses, and they're headed straight for Zrith. Our military is preparing, but they don't understand what they're up against. The council doesn't want to admit it, but they're terrified." Darius leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he processed the information. "What's their game plan?" "They intend to rely on overwhelming firepower and precision strikes, but the Siltar don't fight that way. They're unpredictable, ruthless. Our strategies won't work against them." Darius nodded slowly. "That's what I thought. The Siltar. They're like predators. You can't outsmart them with logic alone. You have to be willing to fight dirty, to use their own chaos against them." Zira felt a surge of hope. "That's why I came to you. You've faced enemies like this before, haven't you? Not on this scale, but you've seen what happens when an enemy doesn't follow the rules of war." Darius nodded again, this time with a grim smile. "Yeah. We call it guerrilla warfare back on Earth. When the enemy's bigger, stronger, and better equipped, you hit them where they least expect it. You strike fast, hit hard, and disappear before they can retaliate. Do you think that would work against the Siltar?" "It's our best shot," Darius said. "But it won't be easy. The Zrithan military is used to order and structure. They'll have to adapt fast if they want to survive." Zira's eyes flickered with determination. I'll convince them. You just need to show them how. 2 days later, the Zrithan military forces were preparing for a confrontation unlike any they had ever imagined. Under Darius's guidance, they began to shift their strategy. Instead of relying on massive, coordinated strikes, they adapted to Darius's guerrilla tactics. Small, fast-moving strike teams were formed, each tasked with targeting key Siltar infrastructure, supply lines, and command centers. The Zrithan soldiers, initially skeptical of the humans' methods, were forced to confront the reality of their situation. The Siltar were closing in, and their usual strategies had already proven ineffective. Desperation made them willing to try something new. As the first skirmishes began, it quickly became clear that Darius's approach was working. The Siltar, expecting the usual Zrithan precision and calculated warfare, were caught off guard by the sudden, chaotic attacks. Zrithan strike teams, using hit-and-run tactics, disabled key Siltar ships, leaving their fleet in disarray. Zrithan society, so used to intellectual superiority and structured order, began to embrace the chaos. And as the battles raged on, Darius became more than just an outsider. He became a symbol of hope, a living challenge to everything the Zrithans had believed about humans. Zira watched it all unfold from the command center, her heart pounding with both fear and excitement. They were winning, for now, but she knew the Siltar wouldn't be defeated so easily. They were adaptable too, and it was only a matter of time before they adjusted to the new tactics. But for now, the Zrithans had something they hadn't had before: an edge. And it had come from the most unexpected of places, a man they had once considered a filthy animal. The battle had raged for weeks. The once serene skies of Zrith were now a patchwork of smoke, debris, and the flashes of energy weapons. In orbit, the wreckage of both Siltar and Zrithan ships drifted, a grim testament to the ferocity of the war. But against all odds, the tide had begun to turn. Darius Cole's unorthodox tactics, combined with Zrithan technology, had given the defenders a crucial advantage. In the command center, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Zrithan commanders, who had once dismissed Darius's methods as crude and undisciplined, now listened intently to every word he said. He stood at the center of a glowing tactical display, a mix of human intuition and Zrithan precision guiding his every move. Around him, Zrithan officers conferred in low tones, adapting to the human strategies they had once ridiculed. Dr. Zira Talon stood at Darius's side, watching him with a mixture of awe and respect. The human captain had done more than simply survive. He had thrived, proving himself a capable leader in the face of an enemy that had brought the Zrithan Empire to the brink of destruction. Zira had never imagined this. The Zrithans had always considered themselves the pinnacle of galactic civilization, their minds far superior to the emotional and chaotic humans. But Darius had shattered that belief, showing that intelligence wasn't just about cold logic or precision. It was about adaptability, creativity, and resilience. The Siltar had underestimated him, just as the Zrithans once had. A sudden chime echoed through the command center, drawing everyone's attention. One of the tactical officers, a Zrithan with silver and blue bioluminescent skin, turned toward the main display. "The Siltar are launching a final assault," he announced, his voice tight with urgency. "Their flagship is moving into position." The room fell into a heavy silence. The Siltar flagship, a massive vessel bristling with weaponry, had remained at the edge of the battlefield throughout the conflict, observing and coordinating their forces. Now, it was entering the fray, its dark silhouette cutting through the debris field like a predator stalking its prey. Zira felt a chill run down her spine. The Siltar were bringing everything they had. If the flagship made it to the surface, there would be no stopping the devastation that followed. Darius's face remained calm, but she could see the tension in his eyes. He knew what was at stake. "We can't let them reach the planet," Darius said, his voice steady. He leaned over the tactical display, studying the positioning of their forces. "Our fleet is too scattered to mount a full defense. We need to strike the flagship directly. High Counselor Vecren, who had remained skeptical of Darius throughout the war, stepped forward. His bioluminescent skin glowed a dull amber, a sign of his uncertainty. A direct assault? We've tried that already. Their shields are too strong, and their firepower. We won't survive another head-on attack. Darius shook his head. I'm not talking about a head-on attack. I'm talking about precision. We don't need to destroy the whole ship, we just need to take out its command structure. Zira looked at the tactical display, following Darius's line of thought. You're thinking of a decapitation strike. If we can disable their command systems, their fleet will fall into disarray. Exactly, Darius said. We hit them fast and hard before they have a chance to react. But we'll need to get closer than any of our ships have been able to get so far. There was a long pause. The Zrithan fleet, though advanced, had been struggling against the Silthar's superior firepower and unpredictability. Many of their ships were damaged, and morale was running thin. But Darius wasn't asking for a conventional strike. He was asking for something far riskier. Vecren's glowing eyes met Darius's. And how do you propose we get close enough to disable their command systems without being obliterated? Darius smiled, a small, grim expression that Zira had come to recognize as the sign of a man with a plan. We go in small. One ship, cloaked, with a strike team on board. We use Zrithan cloaking technology to slip past their defenses, dock with the flagship, and disable it from the inside. Vecren's expression darkened. Infiltrate the Siltar flagship? That's suicide. It's risky, Darius admitted, but it's our best shot. A full frontal assault will fail, and we don't have time for anything else. If we can take out their command systems, the rest of their fleet will fall apart. Without leadership, they're nothing but chaos. Zira watched as the room fell silent, every Zrithan officer turning to Vecren, waiting for his decision. For a long moment, the High Counselor said nothing, his glowing skin pulsing with uncertainty. Finally, he spoke, his voice resigned but resolute. Do it. Hours later, Darius stood in the docking bay of the Zrithan strike vessel, pulling on a sleek set of Zrithan combat armor. The suit felt alien but familiar, its advanced technology melding with human ingenuity to create something new, something better. Around him, a small team of Zrithan soldiers prepared for the mission, their expressions grim but determined. Zira approached him, her own armor glinting under the harsh lights of the bay. I can't believe this is happening, she said, her voice low. An hour ago, the Council still didn't trust you. Now they're putting the fate of the Empire in your hands. Darius chuckled softly, though there was little humor in it. Desperation makes strange allies. Zira smiled, a rare expression for her. Maybe. But it's more than that. You've shown us that there's more to humanity than we ever imagined. Darius's smile faded. Let's hope it's enough. As they boarded the strike vessel, the tension in the air was palpable. The ship was small, sleek, and nearly invisible when cloaked, thanks to Zrithan technology. It would have to get them closer than any other vessel had dared to approach the Siltar flagship. The plan was simple: infiltrate the flagship, disable its command systems, and retreat before the Siltar could react. But Darius knew that in war, nothing ever went according to plan. The strike vessel lifted off, its engines humming softly as it ascended through the atmosphere. Outside, the battle raged on, but the ship slipped through the chaos, invisible to the Siltar sensors. Darius sat in the cockpit, his eyes scanning the tactical display. The Siltar flagship loomed ahead, a massive, jagged structure that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. We're in range, one of the Zrithan pilots announced, her voice tense. Activating docking procedures. The ship shuddered as it latched onto the side of the Siltar vessel, its cloaking field still active. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the docking hatch opened with a hiss, revealing the cold, dark interior of the enemy ship. Darius led the way, his pulse steady but his mind racing. The Siltar corridors were dimly lit, their walls made of an organic, chitinous material that pulsed faintly as if alive. The air was thick with tension. They were deep inside enemy territory now, with no margin for error. "Stay close," Darius whispered, his voice barely audible through the comms. "We're heading for the command center." The strike team moved quickly, their footsteps silent on the strange, pulsating floors. They encountered little resistance at first. Most of the Siltar forces were focused on the battle outside. But as they neared the command center, the air grew thick with a sense of impending danger. Suddenly, a squad of Siltar soldiers appeared from the shadows, their insect-like forms glistening in the dim light. The Zrithan strike team moved into action, their weapons firing in controlled bursts. Darius, wielding a Zrithan pulse rifle, took cover behind an outcropping and fired at the enemy, his shots precise and deadly. The battle was short but fierce. When it was over, the Siltar lay dead, and the team pressed forward. Finally, they reached the command center. It was a vast, circular chamber filled with Siltar officers and technicians, their insectoid forms scurrying between massive control panels. At the center of the room was the command console, exactly what they needed to disable. "Let's do this," Darius said, moving toward the console. But as they approached, the Siltar commander, a massive creature, larger than the others, stepped into their path, its eyes glowing with a malevolent intelligence. The creature let out a shriek, its voice reverberating through the chamber. The final battle had begun. Hours later, the Zrithan fleet watched in stunned silence as the Siltar flagship, once the greatest threat in the galaxy, began to crumble. Its systems, disabled from within, sparked and sputtered as the entire vessel lost power. Without their command structure, the remaining Siltar ships fell into disarray, their once coordinated attacks devolving into chaotic, aimless movements. The Zrithan forces, following Darius's plan, swept in and mopped up the remaining Siltar ships with ease. The battle was over. In the aftermath, the Zrithan Council convened once again, but this time the mood was different. Where once there had been skepticism and distrust, now there was respect and perhaps, for the first time, understanding. Darius Cole stood before the council, his face bruised and his armor scuffed from the battle. Zira stood beside him, her twin sets of eyes glowing with pride. High Counselor Vekran, his expression somber, addressed Darius. "Captain Cole, against all odds, you have led us to victory. You have saved our empire from annihilation. For that, we owe you a great debt." Darius nodded, but his expression remained serious. "You don't owe me anything. We fought this together. It wasn't just me, it was your people, your technology, your willingness to adapt." Vekran's bioluminescent skin pulsed as he considered Darius's words. "Perhaps. But we've learned something from you, Captain. Something we were blind to before. Intelligence, creativity, adaptability, these traits are not exclusive to the Zrithan people. We were wrong to dismiss humanity as inferior." There was a long silence, and then Vekran stepped forward, extending his hand, a rare and significant gesture in Zrithan culture. "You have earned our respect, Captain Cole. Humanity has earned its place among the stars." Darius accepted the gesture, clasping Vekran's hand. There was no triumph in his expression, only quiet satisfaction. The war had been won, but the journey was far from over. As the Zrithans began to rebuild, they did so with a new understanding of their place in the galaxy. They had learned that true strength came not from superiority or intellect alone, but from the ability to grow, to learn, and to embrace the unexpected. And at the center of it all was the man they had once considered a filthy animal, a man who had shown them that the galaxy was far more complex and far more connected than they had ever imagined.